I never imagined one dinner could test me so deeply. She tried to mock me, crush my dignity, and make me feel worthless. I could feel her arrogance pressing down on me with every word. But life has its own way, Shirai. And that night, her arrogance became the lesson she would never forget.
My name is David Martinez, and I'm a 34-year-old software engineer living in Portland, Oregon. I've always believed in treating people with respect, regardless of their background or circumstances. That belief would be tested in ways I never expected when I met Victoria Ashworth through a dating app. Victoria's profile was impressive. Harvard MBA, successful marketing executive, pictures from exotic vacations. When she suggested dinner at Le Bernardin, one of the most expensive restaurants in the city, I should have seen the red flags. But I was genuinely interested in getting to know her. The evening started normally enough. I arrived at the restaurant wearing my best suit, carrying a small bouquet of roses I'd picked up on the way. Victoria was already seated, checking her phone with an expression that screamed impatience. She looked up briefly, her eyes scanning me from head to toe with obvious disappointment. "You're late," she said coldly, though I was actually 5 minutes early. "I'm sorry," I thought. "Don't." She held up her manicured hand. "Just sit down." The first warning sign came when she ordered the most expensive items on the menu without even glancing at the prices. Lobster thermidor, vintage champagne, appetizers I couldn't pronounce. When the waiter asked for my order, I chose something modest. I was trying to be responsible with my finances, having just helped my elderly mother with her medical bills. "Really?" Victoria's voice dripped with disdain. "That's what you're ordering? I mean, if you can't afford to take a woman like me to dinner properly, why are you even here?" I felt my face flush, but I kept my composure. "I just prefer simple meals," she laughed, a harsh sound that made other diners turn to look. Simple meals for a simple man, I suppose. Throughout dinner, Victoria's behavior grew worse. She criticized everything, my job. "So you're basically just a computer nerd. My car? A Honda? How embarrassing, even my apartment. You still rent? At your age?" She spoke loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, clearly enjoying my discomfort. But the breaking point came when she started talking about her ex-boyfriend, Marcus. "Marcus drives a Tesla Model S," she announced, swirling her champagne. "He took me to Paris last month. He's a real man, you know? Someone with ambition, with class. Someone who knows how to treat a woman of my caliber." I sat there, watching this person demolish my character piece by piece, and something inside me shifted. This wasn't about the money or the status symbols. This was about basic human decency, and she had none. When the check came, it was $847. Victoria didn't even reach for her purse. Instead, she leaned back in her chair with a smug smile and said, "I'll wait in the car while you handle this." That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I stood up, placed $50 on the table, enough to cover my modest meal and a generous tip for our server, and looked Victoria directly in the eyes. "You know what, Victoria? You're right. You deserve someone who can match your ... standards. Someone who appreciates who you really are. I hope you find that person." Her confident expression faltered slightly. "What are you doing?" "I'm leaving. You ordered it. You can pay for it." Consider this a lesson in personal responsibility. The shock on her face was palpable. "You can't just leave me here. This is $800. I don't have that kind of cash on me." "Then I guess you'll figure it out. You're a successful Harvard MBA, after all. Problem solving should be your strong suit." As I walked toward the exit, I could hear her voice rising behind me, demanding I come back, calling me names that would make a sailor blush. Other diners were staring now, not at me, but at her. The tables had turned, and the woman who had spent the entire evening trying to humiliate me was now humiliating herself. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I received a summons to appear in small claims court. Victoria Ashworth was suing me for $847 in damages, plus emotional distress. She was about to learn that breaking someone's dignity comes with consequences she never saw coming. The summons arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning, slipped under my apartment door like a bad omen. Victoria Ashworth v. David Martinez. $847 in damages plus $5,000 for emotional distress and public humiliation. I read it 3 times before the reality sank in. She was actually taking me to court for refusing to pay for her expensive dinner. I called my friend Jake, a paralegal who'd helped me understand legal documents before. His laughter echoed through the phone when I explained the situation. "Dude, she's suing you for not paying for a date? That's not how the law works. You had no obligation to pay for her meal." But as I researched similar cases online, I discovered that Victoria had a reputation for these kinds of lawsuits. 3 different men had filed complaints about her on various websites, each describing similar experiences: expensive dinners followed by demands for payment, and in one case, a successful small claims judgment when the man was too intimidated to show up in court. Victoria Ashworth was running a scam, and I was her latest target. The next few days were a blur of preparation. I gathered evidence, screenshots of our dating app conversations, the receipt from the restaurant, witness statements from diners who had overheard her behavior that night. The restaurant manager, Maria Santos, was particularly helpful. She remembered the incident clearly and was willing to testify about Victoria's conduct. But Victoria wasn't making things easy. She'd hired what appeared to be an expensive attorney and had begun a social media campaign to discredit me. She posted on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, painting herself as a victim of a cheapskate who abandoned a woman at dinner. Her posts went viral in certain circles, and suddenly I was getting nasty messages from strangers calling me everything from a deadbeat to worse. I have to ask, situations like this can happen anywhere, in any city across America. Have you ever witnessed something similar in your own community? Drop the name of your city in the comments below. I'm curious to see where our viewers are watching from and if these kinds of dating scams are happening in your area too. The worst part was how the story was being twisted. Victoria's version painted her as an innocent woman who'd been stranded at an expensive restaurant by a cruel man. She conveniently left out the parts about her behavior, her demands, and her complete lack of basic courtesy throughout the evening. My mother called me, worried sick after seeing one of Victoria's posts that had been shared in a local Facebook group. "Mio, what happened that night? This woman is saying terrible things about you." Explaining the truth to my 62-year-old mother was one of the hardest conversations I'd ever had. My mom had raised me to be a gentleman, to treat women with respect, and here I was being painted as someone who abandoned a woman in distress. The irony wasn't lost on me. Victoria was using society's protective instincts toward women to weaponize sympathy for her own gain. But I wasn't going down without a fight. I reached out to a local attorney, Sarah Chun, who specialized in frivolous lawsuits. Sarah was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who listened to my story with a kind of intensity that told me she'd seen this before. "Mr. Martinez," she said, leaning back in her chair, "you're not the first person to walk into my office with a story like this. There are people who make a living manipulating the legal system and social expectations. But here's the thing. The truth has a way of coming out in court, and from what you've shown me, Ms. Ashworth has made some serious mistakes." Sarah explained that Victoria's social media campaign could actually work against her. By posting publicly about the incident, she'd opened herself up to defamation claims if her statements could be proven false. More importantly, her own post contradicted the story she was telling in court. She claimed she was emotionally traumatized, Sarah noted, scrolling through Victoria's Instagram. But she posted about going to another expensive restaurant 2 days later with the hashtag "living my best life." That's not the behavior of someone suffering from emotional distress. As we prepared for court, I realized this case was about more than just $847. It was about standing up to bullies who hide behind legal technicalities and social manipulation. Victoria had underestimated one crucial thing. I had documentation of everything, and the truth was about to catch up with her. The weeks leading up to the court date became an intensive investigation. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was exposing a pattern of manipulation that went far deeper than one bad dinner date. Sarah Chun proved to be worth every penny I was paying her. She approached Victoria's case like a detective, uncovering details that painted a disturbing picture of calculated deception. Our first breakthrough came when we found Victoria's ex-boyfriend, Marcus, the one she'd spent the entire dinner talking about. Marcus Thornton was a 29-year-old investment banker who dated Victoria 6 months prior. When Sarah contacted him, he was eager to share his experience. I should have known something was wrong when she insisted on going to the most expensive places in Seattle, Marcus told us during a video call. She'd order bottles of wine that cost more than my rent, then act offended if I didn't pick up the entire check. When I finally confronted her about it, she threatened to sue me for breach of promise, claimed. I'd led her on about marriage prospects. Marcus had backed down and paid her off to avoid legal trouble, but he'd kept all the documentation. Text messages where Victoria explicitly discussed her strategy for getting men to pay for luxury experiences. Screenshots of her dating app profiles where she used different names and professions depending on the platform. But the real smoking gun came from an unexpected source. I was having coffee with Jake when a woman at the next table overheard our conversation about the lawsuit. She turned around with wide eyes and said, "Wait, are you talking about Victoria Ashworth? Tall blonde, always talking about Harvard?" Her name was Jennifer Kim, and she had her own Victoria story. 3 months earlier, Jennifer's brother had been targeted by the same woman, same scam. Expensive dinner, public humiliation, threats of legal action. Unlike me, Jennifer's brother had caved and paid Victoria $600 to make it go away. "She's been doing this for at least 2 years, Jennifer explained. "My brother found a whole online forum of guys who'd been hit by her. They call her the Collector because she collects payments from men who are too embarrassed to fight back." This revelation led us to 5 more victims, each with remarkably similar stories. Victoria's pattern was always the same. Match with successful-looking men on dating apps, suggest expensive restaurants, behave abusively during dinner, then either collect payment through intimidation or pursue legal action against those who refused. The most damning evidence came from Victoria herself. Sarah had warned me that Victoria's attorney would try to paint me as a misogynist who'd abandoned a vulnerable woman. But Victoria's own social media posts told a different story. Not only had she been posting about expensive dinners and luxury experiences throughout the time she claimed to be emotionally traumatized, but she'd also made several posts that revealed her true mindset. One Instagram story, posted just days after our dinner, showed her at another upscale restaurant with the caption, "When you know your worth, you never settle for less." Another post from her Twitter account read, "Pro tip, if a man can't afford to impress you properly, he's not the one. Standards exist for a reason." But the piece of evidence that would ultimately destroy her case was a blog post she'd written on a now-deleted website called Dating for Success. In the post, titled, "How to Make First Dates Pay Off," Victoria had explicitly outlined her strategy. The key is choosing restaurants that are expensive enough to create financial pressure, but classy enough that walking away would be socially embarrassing for them. Most men will pay rather than cause a scene. For those who don't, small claims court is surprisingly effective. Judges tend to side with women in these situations, especially if you can demonstrate emotional impact. Sarah found this post cached in the Internet Archives, and it was dated 6 months before our dinner. Victoria hadn't just planned to scam me. She'd written a guide for others to follow her methods. As the court date approached, I felt a mixture of nervousness and confidence. The evidence was overwhelming, but I knew Victoria was skilled at manipulation. She'd already convinced hundreds of social media followers that I was the villain in this story. The real test would come when she had to face the truth under oath in front of a judge who couldn't be swayed by crocodile tears or social media campaigns. I was about to learn that justice, when backed by truth, is more powerful than any amount of arrogance or manipulation. Victoria's social media campaign against me escalated into something I never could have imagined. What started as a few Instagram posts complaining about her traumatic dinner experience morphed into a full-scale character assassination that reached thousands of people across Portland and beyond. She'd created what she called the Dinner Date Justice hashtag. POSTING daily updates about her legal battle against the narcissistic man who abandoned me at dinner. Her followers, mostly women who related to stories of dating, disappointments, rallied around her cause with frightening intensity. The comments on her posts were vicious. People who'd never met me were calling me a pathetic loser, a cheapskate, and far worse. Someone even found my LinkedIn profile and began leaving negative reviews on my company's page, claiming I was unprofessional and cruel to women. My boss, thankfully, knew me well enough to recognize the situation for what it was, but the stress was taking its toll. I was losing sleep, constantly checking my phone to see what new lies Victoria had posted about me. She'd even begun making up details that never happened, claiming I'd grabbed her wrist when she tried to stop me from leaving, that I'd screamed profanities at other diners. The turning point came when Victoria made a crucial mistake. In her eagerness to gain sympathy, she posted a video of herself crying in her car, claiming she was too traumatized to eat at restaurants anymore because of what I'd done to her. The post went viral, garnering over 50,000 views and hundreds of supportive comments. But Sarah Chun had been monitoring Victoria's social media activity closely, and she noticed something important. The metadata on the video showed it was filmed in the parking lot of Michelin-starred restaurant Le Petit Maison the same day. Victoria had posted photos of herself having dinner there with another man. She's claiming she's too traumatized to eat at restaurants, Sarah explained, pulling up both posts on her laptop. But she's literally posting from the parking lot of one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. And look at this, she tagged her location and posted photos of a $200 tasting menu just 2 hours later. This wasn't the only contradiction in Victoria's online narrative. We discovered that during the 3 weeks she claimed to be suffering from severe emotional distress, she had attended 5 different high-end restaurants, taken a weekend trip to Napa Valley, posted 47 Instagram photos showing her living her best life, gone on at least 3 more dating app dates with different men. Each post was carefully documented by Sarah's team, creating a timeline that completely contradicted Victoria's claims of trauma and emotional damage. But Victoria's biggest mistake was getting too confident. Emboldened by the support she was receiving online, she began giving interviews to local news stations and podcasts. She appeared on Portland Morning Love, telling host Rebecca Walsh about her terrifying experience with a dangerous man who'd psychologically abused her during dinner. "I've never been so humiliated in my life," Victoria said on air, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "He made me feel worthless, like I wasn't deserving of basic human decency. And then he just abandoned me. Left me stranded with an $800 bill I couldn't pay." The interview was devastating to watch. Victoria was a skilled performer, and she had the host and audience completely convinced that she was a victim. The comments on the station's website were overwhelmingly supportive of her, with people calling for my employer to fire me and worse. But Sarah saw opportunity in Victoria's media appearances. "She's giving us more evidence every time she opens her mouth," Sarah explained. She's claiming under oath that she suffered $5,000 worth of emotional distress. But every interview she gives, every social media post she makes, contradicts that claim. She's either lying about her trauma or she's the fastest recovering victim in history. More importantly, Victoria's story was changing with each telling. Small details shifted, the timeline got fuzzy, and her description of my behavior became increasingly dramatic. In the original police report she'd filed, which was dismissed, I had rudely walked away. In her lawsuit, I had aggressively abandoned her. By the time she reached the morning show, I had psychologically terrorized her. Sarah was building a case that went beyond just the dinner bill. Victoria's lies were so extensive, so well documented, that she was about to face consequences she never saw coming. The court date was just 1 week away, and I was finally feeling confident that the truth would prevail. The morning of the trial, I arrived at the Multnomah County Courthouse 45 minutes early, my stomach churning with nervous energy. Sarah met me at the security checkpoint, carrying 2 thick folders full of evidence and looking more confident than I felt. "Remember what we practiced," she said as we walked toward courtroom 4B. "Stay calm. Stick to the facts and let her dig her own grave." Victoria was already there when we entered. Seated at the plaintiff's table with her attorney, a sharp-dressed man named Robert Sterling who looked like he charged by the minute. She was wearing a conservative navy dress and minimal makeup, a stark contrast to her usual glamorous social media appearance. The transformation was clearly calculated to make her appear more sympathetic. Judge Patricia Wong called the court to order at 9 a.m. sharp. She was a stern-looking woman in her 50s with a reputation for not tolerating nonsense in her courtroom. Victoria's case was the first on the docket. "Ms. Ashworth," Judge Wong began, "you're claiming $847 in damages and $5,000 for emotional distress. Please present your case." Victoria's attorney stood and delivered what I had to admit was a compelling opening statement. He painted a picture of a vulnerable woman who'd been cruelly abandoned by a man who'd invited her to dinner, then humiliated her in public by forcing her to pay for expensive food she never would have ordered on her own. "Your Honor," Sterling said, gesturing toward his client, "Ms. Ashworth trusted the defendant to behave like a gentleman. Instead, he lured her to an expensive restaurant, allowed her to order under the assumption that he would pay, then abandoned her in a calculated act of cruelty that has left lasting psychological scars. Then it was Victoria's turn to testify. She walked to the witness stand with perfect posture, her voice trembling slightly as she was sworn in. The performance was masterful. She seemed fragile, hurt, genuinely traumatized by the experience. "He seemed so nice in our messages," she began, looking directly at Judge Wong. "I thought I was meeting a gentleman for a pleasant dinner. I never imagined someone could be so cruel." Victoria's testimony painted me as a predator who deliberately lured her to an expensive restaurant knowing I had no intention of paying. She claimed I'd been aggressive and hostile throughout dinner, making her feel unsafe and threatened. When she tried to discuss her career achievements, I'd mocked her education and called her worthless. None of it was true. But she delivered each lie with such conviction that I found myself wondering if the judge believed her. The most devastating part of her testimony came when Sterling asked about the emotional impact. "I haven't been the same since that night," Victoria said, her voice breaking. "I've had anxiety attacks, trouble sleeping. I'm afraid to go on dates now because I keep thinking about what he did to me. The humiliation was so complete, so public. I don't know if I'll ever fully recover." She was crying now, real tears that made several people in the gallery shift uncomfortably in their seats. If I hadn't lived through the actual dinner, I might have believed her myself. Then Sterling made a mistake that Sarah had been waiting for. "Ms. Ashworth, can you tell the court about the financial impact this incident has had on your life?" "I had to put the dinner on my credit card," Victoria replied. "It maxed out my available credit, which affected my credit score. I've had to cut back on basic necessities because of what he did to me." Judge Wong raised an eyebrow. "You maxed out your credit card paying an $847 restaurant bill?" "Yes, Your Honor. It was my emergency card, and I don't usually carry much cash." That was Victoria's first major slip. Sarah had researched Victoria's financial records as part of our defense preparation. Far from struggling financially, Victoria had multiple high-limit credit cards and a substantial income from her marketing executive position. But the real show was about to begin. It was my turn to be cross-examined by Sterling, and I could see the confidence in his eyes. He thought he had an easy target, a man who'd been portrayed as a monster by social media, someone who'd be easily flustered and contradictory under pressure. He had no idea what Sarah had prepared, or how thoroughly Victoria had undermined her own case through her lies and social media addiction. The tables were about to turn in ways none of us could have predicted. Robert Sterling approached me with a kind of predatory confidence that told me he was used to intimidating witnesses. His first few questions were designed to make me look bad, focusing on my decision to abandon Victoria and questioning my gentlemanly conduct. "Mr. Martinez," he said, his voice dripping with disdain, "you admit that you walked out on Ms. Ashworth, leaving her alone to pay an $847 bill?" "I left the restaurant after paying for my own meal and tip," I replied calmly. "Ms. Ashworth ordered and consumed her food. I saw no legal or moral obligation to pay for someone else's choices, especially given her behavior." "Her behavior?" Sterling's eyebrows shot up dramatically. "You mean a woman exercising her right to order food at a restaurant?" "I mean a woman who spent 2 hours insulting me, comparing me unfavorably to her ex-boyfriend, calling me worthless, and making it clear that she viewed me as nothing more than a financial resource." Sterling tried to paint my words as lies, but I remained calm and factual. Sarah had coached me well. Stick to what happened. Don't get emotional. Let the evidence speak. Then it was Sarah's turn, and the atmosphere in the courtroom changed completely. "Ms. Ashworth," Sarah began, approaching the witness stand with a tablet in her hands, "you testified that this incident left you traumatized and unable to function normally. Is that correct?" "Yes, that's correct." "So traumatized that you claimed $5,000 in emotional damages?" "Yes." Sarah pulled up Victoria's Instagram account on the tablet and held it where Judge Wong could see. "Can you explain to the court why, just 2 days after this allegedly traumatic incident, you posted this photo of yourself at Le Bernardin, the same restaurant, with the caption 'Back to where it all began, #living my best life'?" Victoria's face went pale. "That was part of my healing process. I was trying to reclaim the space." "Reclaim the space," Sarah repeated. "And this healing process involved ordering a $300 bottle of champagne and posting about your fabulous evening to 15,000 Instagram followers?" I was putting on a brave face. Sarah pulled out her phone and began reading. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence a series of social media posts made by the plaintiff in the 3 weeks following the alleged incident. On March 15th, 2 days after the dinner, she posted, 'Some people just don't recognize quality when they see it. Their loss. #no regrets, #know your worth. Single quotes on March 18th. Another amazing dinner at Kennard. When you have standards, you never settle for less. On March 20th. Wine tasting in Willamette Valley because I deserve the best things in life.'" Judge Wong was leaning forward now, studying the evidence. "Ms. Ashworth, do these posts sound like they were written by someone suffering from severe emotional trauma?" Victoria's attorney objected, but Judge Wong overruled him. The damage was already done, but Sarah wasn't finished. She had found the blog post. "Ms. Ashworth, are you familiar with a website called Dating for Success?" Victoria's eyes widened. I've never heard of it." Sarah pulled out a printed copy of the blog post and handed it to the judge. "Your Honor, this is a blog post titled, 'How to Make First Dates Pay Off,' written under the username Victoria_MBA, posted 6 months before the incident in question." As Judge Wong read the post, her expression grew increasingly stern. The courtroom was dead silent except for the sound of pages turning. "Ms. Ashworth," the judge said finally, looking up from the document, "this post explicitly outlines a strategy for manipulating men into paying for expensive dinners, including the use of small claims court against those who refuse. The writing style and specific details match your testimony perfectly. Are you telling Miss Court that this is just a coincidence?" Victoria looked trapped. Someone must have stolen my identity. Double quotes. Your Honor, Sarah interjected. We also have evidence that Ms. Ashworth has pursued similar lawsuits against at least 4 other men in the past 18 months, all following the exact pattern described in this blog post. The judge looked at Victoria with a kind of expression that could melt steel. Ms. Ashworth, I want you to think very carefully about your next words. Are you claiming that 4 separate men have coincidentally abandoned you at expensive restaurants, requiring legal action? Victoria's composure finally cracked. Her tears seemed real now, but they weren't tears of trauma. They were tears of someone who knew they'd been caught. The truth was finally emerging, and Victoria's carefully constructed facade was crumbling in real time. The silence in the courtroom was deafening as Victoria struggled to answer Judge Wong's question. Her polished facade had completely shattered, revealing the manipulative person underneath. Her attorney looked like he wanted to disappear. Ms. Ashworth, Judge Wong repeated, her voice carrying the weight of authority, I asked you a direct question. Are you claiming that multiple men have coincidentally abandoned you at restaurants? Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. It's complicated, Your Honor. Sarah sensed the moment and pressed her advantage. Your Honor, I'd like to call a witness who can speak to Ms. Ashworth's pattern of behavior. Marcus Thornton appeared via video call, looking professional in his business suit despite testifying from his Seattle office. His testimony was devastating. Victoria has a very specific approach to dating, Marcus explained to the court. She researched men online to determine their income level, then insists on restaurants that cost more than most people make in a week. During dinner, she becomes increasingly hostile and insulting, almost like she's testing how much abuse someone will tolerate before walking away. Judge Wong interrupted. Mr. Thornton, are you saying Ms. Ashworth deliberately provokes confrontations? Absolutely, Your Honor. She told me directly that she considers expensive dinners to be auditions for men, and that anyone who can't afford her lifestyle without complaint isn't worth her time. When I finally refused to pay for a $1,200 dinner, she threatened to sue me for emotional distress unless I paid her $2,000 to make it go away. Victoria's attorney finally stood up. Objection, Your Honor. This is character assassination, not relevant testimony. Overruled, Judge Wong said firmly. Ms. Ashworth opened the door to character evidence when she claimed emotional damages. Continue, Mr. Thornton. Marcus went on to describe text messages where Victoria had explicitly discussed her strategy. She called it quality control for dating. She believed that men who wouldn't pay premium prices for her company weren't worthy of her attention. But the most damaging testimony came from Jennifer Kim, who appeared in person to represent her brother and the other victims who were too embarrassed to testify publicly. Your Honor, Jennifer said, my brother paid Victoria $600 to avoid a lawsuit exactly like this one. She showed him social media posts where she destroyed other men's reputations, made them unemployable in their fields. He was terrified of what she might do to his career. Jennifer presented a folder full of evidence. Screenshots of Victoria's dating app profiles where she used different names and professions, records of her small claims court filings, even a spreadsheet where she tracked her earnings from different men. She's not a victim, Your Honor. She's a predator who uses the legal system and social media to intimidate men into paying her what amounts to blackmail money. Judge Wong studied the evidence carefully, her expression growing more severe with each document. When she looked up at Victoria, there was no sympathy left in her eyes. Ms. Ashworth, in 30 years on the bench, I've never seen such a calculated abuse of the legal system. You've turned dating into a business venture and weaponized legitimate concerns about women's safety to line your own pockets. Victoria finally spoke, her voice shaking. Your Honor, I never meant for it to go this far. I just ... I have expensive taste, and I thought ... double quotes. You thought you could manipulate men into subsidizing your lifestyle through intimidation and fraud, Judge Wong finished. What you've done isn't just morally reprehensible, it's potentially criminal. Sarah stood up. Your Honor, in light of this evidence, we're requesting that Ms. Ashworth's case be dismissed with prejudice, and we'd like to file a countersuit for defamation, harassment, and abuse of process. Judge Wong nodded. Granted. Ms. Ashworth, your lawsuit is dismissed. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for potential criminal charges of fraud and extortion. The gallery erupted in whispers as the reality of Victoria's situation sank in. She wasn't just losing the lawsuit, she was potentially facing criminal prosecution. But Judge Wong wasn't finished. She had one more surprise that would ensure Victoria never tried this scheme again. Ms. Ashworth, you will remain in this courtroom for additional proceedings. Mr. Martinez, your countersuit will be heard immediately. Victoria looked at her attorney in panic, but Robert Sterling was already packing his briefcase. He'd clearly decided this case was unwinnable and potentially damaging to his reputation. The hunter had become the hunted, and justice was about to be served in ways Victoria never imagined possible. What happened next in that Portland courtroom was unlike anything I'd ever witnessed. Judge Wong called a 15-minute recess, during which Victoria's attorney quietly withdrew from the case, leaving her to represent herself against our countersuit. When court reconvened, Victoria looked small and defeated at the plaintiff's table, all alone. The confident woman who had tormented me during dinner, who had launched a vicious social media campaign against my character, was now facing the consequences of her actions without the legal protection she'd taken for granted. Sarah stood to present our countersuit with surgical precision. Your Honor, Mr. Martinez has suffered quantifiable damages as a result of Ms. Ashworth's defamatory campaign. His employer received 17 negative reviews specifically referencing her false claims. His personal reputation in the Portland community has been severely damaged by her deliberately misleading social media posts, which reached over 100,000 people. Judge Wong reviewed the evidence we'd compiled. Screenshots of every social media post, records of the fake reviews, documentation of the harassment I'd received from Victoria's followers. The paper trail was overwhelming. Ms. Ashworth, Judge Wong said, do you have anything to say in your defense regarding these defamation claims? Victoria stood shakily. Your Honor, I was hurt and angry. I didn't think about the consequences. You didn't think about the consequences of deliberately lying about Mr. Martinez to thousands of people? You didn't consider the impact when you posted his workplace information and encouraged people to complain about him? No, Your Honor. Sarah presented our damages calculation, $15,000 for reputation repair, lost opportunities, and emotional distress. Ironically, 3 times what Victoria had tried to claim from me. But Judge Wong had something else in mind. Ms. Ashworth, I'm ordering you to pay Mr. Martinez $10,000 in damages for defamation and harassment. However, I'm also going to offer you an alternative that might be more educational. Victoria looked up hopefully. You can either pay the full judgment, or you can pay $2,500 and perform 200 hours of community service specifically designed to help victims of fraud and manipulation. Additionally, you must post a public apology on all your social media accounts, explaining the truth about what happened and acknowledging your pattern of deceptive behavior. The choice was brilliant. Judge Wong was giving Victoria a chance to partially redeem herself while ensuring her victims and potential future victims would be protected. Victoria chose the community service, perhaps realizing that her reputation was already destroyed and hoping to salvage something from the wreckage of her scheme. But the judge wasn't finished. Ms. Ashworth, I'm also issuing a restraining order preventing you from contacting Mr. Martinez or posting about him on social media. Any violation will result in immediate arrest and the full $10,000 judgment becoming due. Immediately, the most powerful moment came when Judge Wong addressed the broader implications of the case. Ms. Ashworth, your actions have done immeasurable harm not just to Mr. Martinez and your other victims, but to legitimate victims of dating abuse and harassment. You've weaponized real social issues for personal gain, making it harder for actual victims to be believed and supported." Victoria was crying again, but these tears seemed different, less performative, more genuinely remorseful. "Your Honor," she said quietly, "I know what I did was wrong. I got caught up in a lifestyle I couldn't afford, and I convinced myself that these men owed me something just for spending time with me. I see now how twisted that thinking was." Judge Wong leaned forward. "Ms. Ashworth, I hope this experience teaches you that actions have consequences and that the law exists to protect people from predators, not to enable them. You have a choice now: learn from this and become a better person, or continue down this path and face criminal charges." The proceedings concluded with Victoria signing the restraining order and community service agreement. As she walked out of the courtroom, she stopped briefly at our table. "David," she said, her voice barely audible, "I'm sorry. I'm genuinely sorry for what I put you through. You didn't deserve any of it. I looked at this woman who had tried to destroy my life, who had attempted to turn my basic human decency into a weakness she could exploit. Part of me wanted to reject her apology, to let her know exactly how much pain she'd caused. Instead, I found myself saying, 'Victoria, I hope you get the help you need. I hope you find a way to be happy that doesn't involve hurting other people.'" She nodded and walked away, and I never saw her again. 3 days later, Victoria posted the court-ordered apology on her social media accounts. It was detailed, honest, and devastating to read. She admitted to her pattern of manipulation, named several of her victims, and encouraged other women to report similar scams. The post went viral, but this time, the attention was focused on her deception rather than her victimhood. Within a week, the Portland police received reports about 3 other women running similar schemes throughout the city. Victoria's exposure had opened the floodgates, and other victims were finally coming forward. My own reputation began to recover as the truth spread. The fake reviews were removed from my company's page, and several local news outlets ran follow-up stories about the case. I even received messages from other men who'd been targeted by similar scams, thanking me for having the courage to fight back. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came 6 months later, when I received a letter from the community service organization where Victoria was volunteering. She had become one of their most dedicated volunteers, working with fraud victims and helping to educate people about manipulation tactics. According to the letter, Victoria had told her supervisor that helping real victims had shown her the true impact of predatory behavior, and that she was committed to making amends for the rest of her life. Justice, I learned, isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about transformation, taking someone who has caused harm and giving them the opportunity to prevent others from experiencing that same pain. The woman who had tried to break my dignity had, in the end, found her own. The months following the trial brought changes I never expected. The court case had been reported in the Portland Tribune, and suddenly I found myself receiving messages from people across the country who had experienced similar situations. Men and women alike shared stories of dating manipulation, financial exploitation, and social media harassment. What struck me most was how many people had simply paid the money to make the harassment stop, too embarrassed or intimidated to fight back. One man from Denver told me he'd paid his manipulator $3,000 over the course of 6 months, afraid that she'd destroy his medical practice if he refused. A woman from Phoenix described a male version of Victoria who had used emotional manipulation and threats of suicide to extract money from multiple female victims. I realized that what had happened to me wasn't an isolated incident, it was part of a broader pattern of people weaponizing dating culture and social media for financial gain. The rise of online dating had created new opportunities for predators to identify and target victims with surgical precision. But there was also something encouraging happening. Victoria's court-ordered apology had inspired other victims to come forward, and several copycat scammers had been exposed and prosecuted. The Portland District Attorney's Office even created a special task force to investigate dating-related fraud, partly as a result of our case. Sarah Chun called me with updates as Victoria's community service progressed. The organization she was working with, Portland Fraud Victim Services, had initially been skeptical about accepting a reformed scammer as a volunteer. But Victoria's work had proven genuinely valuable. She's become one of their most effective educators, Sarah told me during one of our check-ins. She can spot manipulation tactics that even trained counselors miss because she knows the playbook from the inside. She's helped identify 3 major dating scams operating in the Portland area. The personal growth aspect was encouraging, but I was more interested in the practical impact. Victoria had helped recover over $50,000 for fraud victims and had assisted in the prosecution of 2 other dating scammers. Her inside knowledge of the tactics and psychology involved had made her uniquely valuable in preventing others from becoming victims. 6 months after the trial, I received an unexpected phone call from a producer at the Dr. Phil show. Victoria had written to them, asking if she could appear on the show to warn people about dating scams. She wanted to use her story as a cautionary tale and educational opportunity. She specifically asked that you be invited to participate, the producer explained. She said she owed it to you to help spread awareness about these scams, and that your perspective as a victim who fought back would be valuable for viewers. I declined the television appearance. I'd had enough of public attention, but I was struck by Victoria's continued efforts to make amends. This wasn't court-ordered anymore. Her community service had been completed months earlier. She was choosing to keep fighting against the type of behavior she'd once embodied. The experience taught me several important lessons about human nature and personal resilience. First, that standing up to bullies, even when it's difficult and uncomfortable, is often the only way to stop their behavior. If I had simply paid Victoria's bill that night, she would have continued targeting other men, and her victims list would have grown. Second, I learned that the truth has remarkable power when it's properly documented and presented. Victoria's downfall wasn't caused by my word against hers. It was caused by her own actions, captured in her social media posts, blog entries, and pattern of behavior. She defeated herself through arrogance and overconfidence. Third, I discovered that social media, while it can be weaponized for harm, can also be a powerful tool for justice when the truth finally emerges. The same platforms Victoria used to try to destroy my reputation eventually became the means of her own exposure. But perhaps most importantly, I learned that people are capable of genuine change, even those who seem irredeemably selfish or manipulative. Victoria's transformation from predator to advocate wasn't just court-ordered performance. It represented real personal growth that benefited the entire community. The experience also strengthened my belief in treating people with dignity and respect, even when they don't treat you the same way. My decision to remain calm and factual throughout Victoria's attacks, rather than responding with anger or cruelty, had ultimately worked in my favor during the legal proceedings. Looking back, I'm grateful for what happened. As strange as that might sound, the experience tested my character, taught me valuable lessons about resilience and justice, and ultimately led to positive changes that protected other people from similar harm. Sometimes the most difficult experiences become the most meaningful ones. 2 years later, I found myself back at Le Bernardin, the same restaurant where this entire ordeal began. This time, I wasn't there for a disastrous date, but for a celebration dinner with my now girlfriend Emma, who I'd met through mutual friends rather than a dating app. Emma knew the whole story, of course. It had become somewhat legendary in our social circle, not as a tale of victimization, but as an example of how standing up for yourself, even in difficult circumstances, can lead to positive change. As we sat at our table, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. Here I was, enjoying the same expensive restaurant that had been the setting for Victoria's attempted manipulation, but this time with someone who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. Our server, coincidentally, was Maria Santos, the restaurant manager who had testified on my behalf during the trial. She recognized me immediately and approached our table with a warm smile. "Mr. Martinez, it's wonderful to see you back here under happier circumstances," she said. "I hope you don't mind me saying, but what you did was very brave." "We've actually started training our staff to recognize the kind of behavior you described, and we've been able to help several customers avoid similar situations." It struck me then how far-reaching the consequences of that one evening had become. What started as a personal conflict had evolved into educational programs, policy changes, and protection for future potential victims. Emma squeezed my hand under the table. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "Not everyone would have had the courage to fight back like you did." Later that evening, as we walked through downtown Portland, Emma asked me a question that made me think deeply about the entire experience. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had just paid the bill that night?" I considered it carefully. Victoria would have seen it as validation of her approach. She would have continued targeting other men, probably escalating her tactics over time. The men who came after me would have suffered worse treatment, and she never would have faced consequences for her actions. But also, I continued, she never would have had the opportunity to change. If she'd never been caught and prosecuted, she'd still be running the same scams today. In a strange way, holding her accountable gave her the chance to become a better person. We'd reached Pioneer Courthouse Square, and I paused to look around at the city I'd called home for over a decade. Portland had always been a place that valued authenticity and standing up for what's right, and this experience had reinforced those values in me. The whole thing taught me that dignity isn't something other people can take away from you. I told Emma, "Victoria tried to break my dignity by treating me as less than human, but my dignity was never dependent on her approval or respect. It came from knowing who I am and what I stand for." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "And now she's found her own dignity through helping others." That was exactly right. Victoria had spent years trying to derive self-worth from expensive restaurants, designer clothes, and the ability to manipulate others. It wasn't until she lost all of that and was forced to confront the harm she'd caused that she discovered genuine self-respect through service to others. I pulled out my phone and showed Emma the latest update I'd received from the Fraud Victim Services organization. Victoria had been promoted to a supervisory role and was now training other volunteers. She'd also started a blog, this time focused on helping people recognize and avoid dating scams rather than perpetrating them. Her latest post was titled, "From Predator to Protector: How I Learned That True Worth Comes from Helping Others." It had been shared thousands of times and had helped identify several more dating scams across the Pacific Northwest. As we walked home, I reflected on how the experience had changed me as well. I was more confident in my ability to handle difficult situations, more aware of manipulation tactics, and more committed to treating others with respect, regardless of how they treat me. But perhaps most importantly, I'd learned that sometimes the best way to defeat someone who tries to break your dignity is to maintain it so completely that they eventually find their own. Before we go, I'm curious, have you or someone you know ever encountered similar manipulation in dating or other situations? Every city has its share of people who try to exploit others' kindness or social expectations. Drop your city name in the comments and let us know if you've seen these kinds of tactics in your area. Your awareness and shared experiences help protect others in your community. Remember, your dignity is yours to keep, no matter what anyone else tries to do to you. Stand up for yourself, document everything, and never let someone else's bad behavior change who you are at your core. Sometimes the most important battles we fight are the ones that protect not just ourselves, but everyone who comes after us. Thank you for watching Touching Stories. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear this message. Your support helps us continue telling stories that matter.